Okay, so this is the 5th video lecture in early childhood. The last slide specific to cognitive development. This slide just has a little bit of information on it about different kinds of early childhood learning structures, specifically the Montessori method, which is described as this or what it looks like is a very unstructured kind of learning environment where the child leads, and in theory the learner or the teacher is supposed to respond to the child's interests. Some people speak very highly of a Montessori style, others don't find it don't appreciate it's what you would call lack of structure, and it's considered sort of where the child is learning based on the child's interests. You may remember in a previous chapter we were talking about like niche picking versus evocative development. That's sort of what I think about when I think about Montessori. Like, this would be in a really great Montessori setting, the teachers, the professional, the educators would be highly responsive to whatever interests the child happened to be interested in, but of course that would be influenced by what kind of built environment happened to be available to the child. So it sounds really cool, but this is probably only ideal in certain settings with certain pairs between child and learner. So that learns independently. Another one is honestly, it's a developmental learning style, teaching style that I've never heard of before I read it in this textbook. It's very similar to a Montessori style. Compensatory programs, this is just a term given to child developmental or preschool is really what we're talking about, preschool environments, but the idea is that these structures respond to or are in place to account for or make up for some sort of gap in a child's life. So typically a perfect example of a compensatory program would be Head Start, Project Head Start, which is actually started in 1965 under President Johnson's War on Poverty, and it was intended, it's what they call a whole child thing. It's a whole child program. So it is a preschool / daycare center that is made specifically available to at-risk kids, which is code word for poor kids, and it is supposed to address the whole child and the whole family by providing things like mental health care services, physical services, like there might be a clinic or access to, say, immunization clinics, or maybe even social support services. But the idea is that it's not just for the kid, it's for the whole family. Compensatory in that this is not everyone has access to Head Start. And there's even, there used to be, at least, I don't know how many of these programs have been defunded, but there used to be something called Early Head Start, which was actually for children less than 3. But again, you had to be at risk. The research does indicate that these are useful programs at least up until, I think it was 3rd grade, and that was when the difference between the kids that went to kindergarten or preschool and the kids that didn't begins to level off. So you see this significant difference in the development with kindergartners, 1st graders up till 3rd grade, and then it kind of levels off. And then then kindergarten, of course, is sometimes called, for some children, they don't do any preschool. They start off with kindergarten, and generally what the other textbooks that I've used have talked about is children that are successful in kindergarten are ones that are like have the emotional development, and so they're able to sort of interact with their peers in a way that is so their peers are sort of at a similar emotional developmental stage. And this is generally thought of like learning isn't supposed to be happening in kindergarten. I mean, it used to be that this would be what transition children into real school. So they learned about, lunch period and recess in kindergarten. But because so many children are going to preschool, it does sort of raise the question about what is the point of a kindergarten. And in fact, and some have criticized kindergarten for being too structured, for too much into the reading and writing and arithmetic that is supposed to be saved for first grade. And then of course we have the issue, and then other things that are discussed in the chapter about kindergarten are how some states require them. So according to your textbook, 13 states require it's required of 5-year-olds. Some places it's half day, some places it's full day. I actually went to a full day kindergarten, which is more common in rural places. I lived in a rural place because of the way that rural people's lives are structured, and that the kindergarten may be so much further away from where people live, as opposed to if you are in a really dense sort of city and the kindergarten is just down the block. Okay, so that is the last slide specific to cognitive development. From here on out, we're going to talk about the psychosocial, and in some cases the psychosocial emotional development of children. This slide specifically is about the concept of self-concept, some terms relative about self-concept. So you have the definition, the cognitive, the way children think about themselves, the way they feel about themselves. This begins to emerge, or at least the recognition of a self-concept begins to emerge around 5 or 6. It's not till this end of this period where kids are able to distinguish the difference between what we call their ideal self versus their real self. So this is how I see myself, but that may not actually be how I am. I mean, this is a really cognitive leap, right? But what is relevant, I think, more than anything, is the acknowledgement of the role of culture and race and disability. Well, race is part of culture, and how in the way a child thinks about themselves. There's been some classical research done, and I'm going to try to find a video and put it in the module, of children of color, so black children and white children, and then giving them dolls, white dolls and black dolls, and then asking the children to describe or point out which doll is the good doll, which doll is the bad doll, which doll is the smart doll, which doll is the dumb doll. And I think it's disturbing evidence suggests that black children will call the white child the good or the smart child, and even black children will call the black child bad or not smart. And imagine what this means for their own self-concept. If a black child is willing to say the black doll is bad, does that also reflect on how the child feels about themselves? And that's really the nature of what that research is about. Similarly, when we think about other cultural elements, we think about an individualistic culture versus a collectivist culture. An interesting thing noted in your textbook is the way children draw pictures of themselves. And your textbooks points out that in children raised in an individualistic culture will draw themselves bigger. They'll draw their little stick people will be bigger. And children in collective cultures will actually draw the group closer together. And it even suggested that in some collective cultures, children won't even draw themselves at all. So it is intended, or this is hints at the way a child thinks about themselves and the way they think about their place within the larger group. Individualistic kids see themselves as big. Kids in collective cultures maybe even forget themselves altogether. There's also an interesting discussion about disability status, and the research suggests that disabled kids globally, their self-esteem is not impaired relative to the kids that don't have a disability, only specific to whatever that ability is or that disability is. So in other words, a kid who maybe has mobility issues and can't run, maybe they're in a wheelchair, they will see themselves as smart and funny and all these other things, but in terms of their athletic ability, they may have a diminished self-esteem in relative to their athletic ability. And this is kind of this is a very insightful element of self-awareness self-awareness, that children would have this self-awareness. Self-esteem is another, it's not the same as self-concept. Self-esteem is the esteem or the value that we give ourselves. And what the research suggests is as early as 5 and 7, a child, their self-esteem at this stage will be relatively stable over time, but I have read some interesting stuff about teenagers, and specifically teenage girls, that when they hit puberty, their self-esteem begins to decline. So we see hints at self-esteem early on in 5 or 7, but it's not exactly true that remains consistent over the long haul. Again, we see cultural differences in a collective culture where where the self is supposed to be humble, where less, no, humble is probably not the right word, but the self is less than the group. Children may express a lower self-esteem than children who are raised in a culture where they are supposed to be individuals, right? Where self-esteem in our very individualistic culture is expected. You are expected to have a high self-esteem. Of course, this isn't true in some, I keep thinking of the Amish. In Amish communities, that's not true. So you have those subgroups. And then, of course, the way a parent praises or the way a parent evaluates the behaviors of a child, of course, are also influenced by whatever the norms. So again, I'm going to use the Amish. If in the Amish community humility is the value of my group, if I am a 7-year-old and I am say exuberant and drawing a lot of attention to myself, I won't probably receive praise from my parents, because in my group the value is humility, and I'm not conforming to the ways of my group, and so therefore I will not be praised. The same way if I'm in a different culture and humility is not a value, but individualism is, I'll be praised for individualism in an individualist culture. I hope that makes some sense. Okay, I'm going to stop here. I want to come back. I want to talk about emotions and gender.